You're listening to the Film Festival Secrets podcast. I'm your host, Chris Holland. This is the first official episode of the new season of the podcast after the successful funding of the Film Festival Secrets 2.0 campaign. And I want to thank everybody who contributed, made this a reality. I deeply, deeply appreciate it. And I plan on rolling out new episodes once a week, thereabouts, until the end of the year, maybe with a few breaks in there. Those of you who are waiting to listen in on some live interviews, I will have some dates for you soon. But until then, there are some episodes that I have recordings for already, so I'll be rolling those out, and I hope you enjoy those as well. If you missed out on the campaign, you can still go to getmoresecrets.com and pre-order the second edition of Film Festival Secrets, the book. And when you do that, you'll get the electronic versions of the first edition included in that price. And that includes the PDF, Kindle, and iBooks compatible files. So no matter what device you're reading on, you can load those in and it'll be compatible with it. This episode is sponsored in part by the Taos Shorts Film Festival. You'll be hearing about them later, and by partners like Film Three-Way and Seed and Spark. My guests on today's show are Alexis and Bodine Boling, the husband and wife filmmaking team who made one of my favorite films of last year. It was called Movement and Location. The film features, I'm a big nerd, so I love this film. It's got time-traveling refugees who have fled to their past, our present, to escape the harsh conditions of the future. And they don't really go into too much detail about what those conditions are or why they'd want to flee them, which kind of adds to the mystery and the intrigue. But it's an interesting concept. Bodine wrote the script, a bunch of drafts, as you'll hear, and stars in the film, which Alexis directed. It is actually, as I record this, doing a 1-week theatrical run in New York. Although you probably won't hear this in time to actually go to that, even if you do live in New York, it is going to be available on demand very soon. And I'll have the URL and all that for you at the end of the episode. But you can look up Movement and Location on your web browser of choice and find that really quickly. I talked to them in their home in Brooklyn, which was also the film's setting, and asked them about their approach to science fiction to get things rolling. I should also mention that because we were recording in their home, you're going to hear some thumps and bumps as we thoughtlessly bump our hands against the table where the mic was standing. You're going to hear some room reverb, so just count it as a little theater of the mind and put yourself in that Brooklyn apartment with the three of us. So, I've seen your film. I know your film, but how do you describe it to other people when they ask?
A casual science fiction feature about time travel in modern-day Brooklyn.
Yeah. How did you come to casual science fiction? What does that mean?
Science fiction where there are no special effects, where it's much more about people and relationships and stuff that feels very real and natural, but takes place in a science fictional sort of backdrop.
Yeah.
Yeah, rather than sort of overwhelming or trying to overwhelm people with a lot of, crazy action sequences or visual effects, the idea here being that you place certain limits and certain natural limits that are already in place because of your budgetary restrictions, and it forces for you as the filmmaker to push things just one step further, and I think hopefully, if it's done correctly, forces the audience to use their imagination more, because everything isn't spelled out for you. It's much more of like here's this puzzle, and it's in a seemingly natural world, but there are things that are just slightly different.
Yeah. I really love movies like that. Another Earth and Sound of My Voice, I think, are two examples of casual science fiction that maybe don't call themselves that, but are the same sort of genre. And I really love stories like that.
Yeah. They also, I think the attraction for a lot of people who write those scripts is it's going to be cheap to make. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, of course.
Were there any surprises on how not cheap it was going to be to make? It ended up being? For what effects you had, which weren't many.
We had none.
Yeah. Other than special effects makeup, which is I don't think we can kind of consider that.
Yeah, especially the way that we ended up doing that. It was very non-special effectsy. Production, and especially in New York City in February, when you're putting it for the most part on credit cards, there are a number of surprises about how much things cost. That sort of, 2 accidents with the cube truck, it's stuff that just, it's hard to predict just how crazy stuff we'll get.
You said the way we ended up doing that special effects. Can you describe the effect and what you did?
So there are three characters in the film that are time travelers, and the way that my character discovers, so there's a teenager that my character discovers and realizes that she's from the future also, and she notices a scar on her wrist. So to do the scar, we had a makeup artist who does special effects makeup, and she did it was like this kind of latex, this sort of clear latex stuff you get at like Ricky's or someplace that does specialty makeup, and then we just painted it with eyeshadow. And it was not, we were just really understaffed, and it was a very stressful environment, and it didn't always get the same attention in every shot. And that's one of the things when I watch the film, I'm a little bit like, I wish we'd worked a little bit harder on that. But that's the only special effect that is in the film. And I'm sure
somebody calls you out on that every single time.
No, people are actually very sweet about it. I'm surprised I don't get more about that.
Wow.
But it is something that I cringe a little bit during that part. Otherwise, for shooting it in 18 days, I'm really proud of it. But there, of course, when it's your own thing, and I wrote and I also edited the film, so I've seen it a million times. So things like that really jump out at me.
Yeah. And so when did you feel like you had it in the can and ready to take it to festivals? What was it that made you feel like, okay, it's done?
Well, we shot it in 18 days, and we didn't do any reshoots. We couldn't afford them, and I don't think needed them.
Let me just say that, in terms of pre-production and the script writing process, we spent a long, long time. She really did. Maybe a year and a half.
It took me a year and a half to write.
So 17 drafts.
17 discrete drafts.
Yeah. I mean, also we've been in the business for quite a while now, so we sort of knew the realities of what the production was going to be like. It was grueling, and it was very cold, and we were bleeding money, but we sort of expected all of that. Once we had the actual shooting in the can, then it was, I think the editing process probably took you maybe a few months until it was something that was watchable. What'd you say?
It was about 5 months before I was locked picture.
Yeah.
And then it took about basically until we got into a film festival for the score and sound design to be finished. It was like another 9 months on that.
Yeah.
And they did such a great job.
Yeah. So there's so many steps along the way, and it's such a long time to market. I mean, I think that's one of aside from being sort of a risky thing that that it's risky and you're
most
sort of
fail. Most don't even get finished.
I think probably the closest thing to it would be starting a pop-up restaurant or something.
Right.
All right, we're just going to do this overnight. Like, all right, this will just have to work. We'll make it work.
Yeah.
It's sort of like that on the production side, and that kind of calms down, and then you sort of have the marathon of post-production, and then you have the sort of marathon of the film festival world, and now we're just entering into sort of the marathon of marketing and distribution. So it never ends, but it is exciting. But I think it's that time to market that is kind of the killer, because you tie up all this capital, you tie up you're turning down paying work, and then it's quite a bit of time before you can actually hopefully start to see some returns, and then put that into your next project or whatever it is that you're going to do. So. I mean, I think that's one area where I think independent filmmakers, in sort of the new world of so much media being out there, if we can figure out, I mean, quality takes time, but if you can kind of figure out how to close that loop down a little bit, so you're not just in no man's land for so long, I think that might be helpful. But it is definitely a marathon.
Well, I had planned to get into this a little later, but you're sort of going there now. So let's talk about feature films and whether they're viable as art and commerce, right? I mean, it just seems so much like episodic content, whether it's short form webisodes or whether it's long form, release a series or a season's worth of episodes at once on Netflix, whatever. Like, that seems to be the way that it's going, and that's what seems to be. That's certainly what I watch more of. What is the current state of the feature film in the independent world?
Yeah, I think
we blew you away with a really big question.
I know, that's
fascinating. I love this question because I stay up nights thinking about this question. I think certainly, what is the place of independent feature films? I think, when I first became enchanted with them, I think they sort of served a very different role, and I think the way that people sort of perceived them, the way that people, watched them and enjoyed them and discussed them was very different from what it is now. And I think in some ways, both on the commerce side and the art side, we as independent filmmakers in this current generation, we have to kind of reinvent ourselves, because in many ways, the traditional role of independent film, which in my mind was to, tell stories and make, art movies that otherwise wouldn't be told. Now all the tools have been democratized, which is a great thing. So cameras are better and cheaper. We can actually do our own post-production. Now we can actually do our own distribution. But the challenge now is marketing. I think that's probably the biggest challenge that as independent, filmmakers we're facing. Because if you have a series, theoretically, you have some money behind you. There's a pre-existing network that you're plugged into. So you've already sort of got that market carved out. The marketing is sort of done for you. If you're a one-off, feature film, I think they're viable if you're taking the long view and if you're planning on making a career out of it. But I think there is very much a big question mark in terms of certain budget levels that traditionally have been, what it costs to make an independent feature film, where I think you can get into a bit of trouble, if you spend too much money. But on the other hand, if you are making things on a lean budget, and I think we'll probably know a lot more in the next, few years as some of these distribution pathways, are explored a little bit further. And as I think people are more transparent about what the numbers actually look like, then I think we'll start, it's like Moneyball, you'll be able to say like, oh, okay, we're going to make this. We know what we're doing. We're going to make it for 100,000, and we think we can probably, double that or triple that. It might take a couple years, and then if we build a big enough catalog, then maybe this works. But right now, it's the Wild West. Nobody really knows what's going on. So both on the art side and on the commerce side, I think we have to really try to reinvent a lot of the models, because it's a whole new world, but a very exciting world.
I still watch a lot of features. The only web series that I watch is High Maintenance, which I think is just amazing. It's so well done. It's just so good. But I really like features, and I really like that form. And as a writer, I think that it's such a great length to really tell a story and kind of get into something. And that I really enjoy. And then there's also, just anecdotally, like I find something legitimizing, I guess, about having made a feature. Like I feel like I'm, not that I necessarily feel that taken seriously, like in the industry as a whole, but like I do feel like that's, I don't know, it just, people respond to that as like having made a feature is like all the time when I'm at parties and the subject comes up of making a film and going to festivals or whatever, people are always like, oh, it's a short film. And I'm like, no, it's a feature. And it's like they instantly, their attitude about it changes. This is again, just super anecdotally, but I have noticed that just in terms of like making a feature and the point of making a feature and trying to establish yourself. Maybe there's something still to that a little bit, the magic of movies, even as the industry is changing so much.
It's sort of upside down, the credibility of a feature versus the, dollar per unit of effort, whatever that unit is, totally. Right? Especially when you flip flop to advertising, which is, I'm not saying there's not a lot of effort put into it, but you're making a 30-second whatever it is, right? Yeah. And the dollar per unit of effort there is just off the charts, right? I mean, I know so many people in your position who are supporting themselves making 30-second commercials and then putting that money into their feature films and making almost nothing in return for the feature film. Yeah. The feature film, they used to say, I want to make a short film. It'll be my calling card, right? And I'll go to festivals and that'll be how people will know me. Well, now it's kind of like you have to make an indie feature. Yeah, exactly. Right. And fortunately, you can do that on maybe what you used to pay to make a short. Yeah. But, the credibility, gosh, I think Sundance is up to something like 10,000 shorts a year now. Wow. Yeah. Wow. 10,000 shorts. And I think it's like almost 15 total if you count features in there. So like the number of films they take in per year, the last hard numbers I had were about 12K. So I think it's up to 15 now from the rumors I've heard. And so when you figure out, and not everybody is sending their film to Sundance. Yeah. So how many short films out there every year that don't get to festivals or just end up on YouTube initially? Like that's an awful lot of narrative and documentary content going on out there. Definitely.
It's mind-blowing.
Yeah. I mean, easier to get started, easier to learn, but making your mark is just, it's intimidating for sure.
Absolutely.
Fortunately, the only experience I had with filmmaking came long before any of this. And boy, I made every mistake in the book. I'm actually going to write an article about this during this campaign because I want people to know that, everybody starts someplace. Mm-hmm. And I never set out to make a film. I had an idea for a movie and a friend of mine loved it and ran with it. But, I gave him some money and helped him write a few jokes and whatever and sort of watched as he did. And we made every classic mistake in the book. It was a short, but it was 45 minutes long. Oh, yeah. And it was mostly improvised and it was kind of edited. I mean, I don't want to sell his work short and his wife, who is, a professional industrial filmmaker, did a good job. But, we broke a lot of festival rules and it was clear that film was never going to play festivals. Yeah. So, it's just funny to think that later, a lot later, I would develop any expertise in film festivals whatsoever, having done nothing to even investigate how to get this film into festivals. But, oh well, I don't think I knew. I definitely didn't know how important they'd become to me later, that's for sure. Well, so let's bring it back around to festivals in your film. How did you guys get started with festivals and start investigating that whole scene?
I think we got started with a lot of rejections.
Yeah, we got a lot of rejections. We aimed very high, like everyone does. And we also submitted rough cuts to, like Sundance and South by Southwest. And, but we submitted a pretty much final product to the Brooklyn Film Festival. And that was our premiere. And I remember that was the only festival that called me to tell me that we'd gotten in. I thought that would be more common than it was. But, Brooklyn Film Festival called. We were on a shoot. Alexi and I were on a shoot together for a nonprofit we've done some video work for that I've been volunteering with for a while. And I was, I got the phone call and he said that he loved the film and he really wanted to program it. And I burst into tears. At that point, I was pretty sure that no one was ever going to take us. And not only had we spent all of our money and like 3 years of our lives on this project, but that literally nothing was ever going to happen with it. And it was the most incredible weekend. That premiere, they gave us 2 incredible slots. They gave us a Friday night and then they gave us a Saturday night. And then, we shot in Brooklyn. A lot of our crew and cast are in Brooklyn and all of our friends are in Brooklyn. And it was just the most incredible place to premiere. And then we ended up winning a few awards. I got Best Screenplay, which again made me burst into tears. We got the Audience Award and Best Score. The amazing Dan Tepfer scored our film and just did a beautiful job. Best weekend of my life, actually, that premiere.
Yeah, the festivals were amazing. And I think the one thing we just, it was new to us. It was a whole new world, and we certainly weren't strategic about it in a new way. We knew that the odds were against us in terms of sort of the big festivals because we didn't know anybody there. It was our, first feature film. So, we were realistic about that. But the festivals that did accept us, I'm proud to say, they just pulled it off the pile.
We didn't know anybody.
We just didn't know anybody. It wasn't like we were a known quantity in any way. So we just submitted it blindly and
threw it out of box. Yep. Paid the full.
Fingers crossed and
I spent probably $2,000 on festival submission fees. But we got into a couple places and I've had such a great time.
Yeah, met some amazing people. Oh my gosh, some really great experiences.
Great Q&As.
Yeah. And every time we feel like the festivals are sort of dying down, then we get invited, to other ones, which is a cool thing. It is sort of a momentum that occurs. Somebody sees something somewhere and then they say, oh, this would be a great fit. So that's been encouraging,
Yeah. So you did Brooklyn in the fall?
It's in
summer.
Yeah.
Of 2014.
Yeah.
And we're recording in mid-2015, and you guys are still getting invitations.
Yeah, the last festival, it's just been just over a year. We just played Sci-Fi London, which we were unfortunately not able to go to. It's the first one we missed. We were on a corporate job in Hawaii, actually. Otherwise, I would have been in London. Nothing else could have kept me away. But I needed the money more than I needed to spend the money. So we went to Hawaii instead. And we're going to be playing in a science fiction fantasy convention in Tel Aviv, actually. Someone from there got in touch with me and asked if they could screen it. So that's happening next. And then we have a couple more science fiction fantasy specific festivals that we've applied to that we're waiting to hear from. So, yeah.
And then release it this fall.
Yeah, then release it this fall. Oh, and we're also part of the Southern Circuit tour.
Okay,
which is super cool. So we're going to be playing 4 art house cinemas in the South in October. Three of those screenings are in October, and then we're playing in New Orleans in December.
Cool.
That's part of that.
We're very
They're
excited
flying
about
us
that.
down and paying us. It's amazing. It's the entire thing is the most. I couldn't believe when we got in. I was so excited.
Yeah,
What an honor.
The Southern Circuit that does some really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
They've made sort of a cottage industry out of finding arts organizations that want film programming, but would rather just hire somebody to do it than, and for cheaper than they could hire a film programmer.
Of course.
Yeah. I've known a number of filmmakers who have gone through it, and they just get to hang out with other filmmakers and, just go from city to city and show their film
Yeah, I have to say, that's been my favorite part of this whole thing is that experience of the Q&A and getting to share the movie with people who are super engaged and want to see it and have a lot of interesting questions. I think our best Q&A was Atlanta Film Festival.
Yeah.
I loved that Q&A. I loved that whole experience of playing that festival, but that was
really
Cameron
magic.
did such a great job leading it and just had such a good time.
It was magical.
Yeah.
For me, growing up in Atlanta and
Yeah.
outside of Atlanta and Georgia.
And knowing that theater.
Seeing so many movies. I think I saw Mulholland Drive there. I mean, it just was this in my mind. It's like the epic cinema.
Right.
So to be able to screen our movie there was a real treat.
Yeah.
It was really special.
Well, location, obviously, in the title, Brooklyn is such a large part of that film. It's a character in that film. Certainly, if you know Brooklyn at all and recognize, but even if you don't, you really get a sense of place out of the film. What were the challenges of film? I mean, New York is notoriously hard to film in.
Yeah.
But
For good reason.
Start with the weather and we'll move on from there.
Yeah, it was February. We had a blizzard at one point. We were shooting a lot of exteriors. The following winter was much, much worse in terms of snow. If we'd gotten that level of snow in 2013 when we were shooting, we would have probably had to cancel. I don't know what we would have done.
It was still bad enough, though. I mean,
really
imagine working 18-hour production days and then you get home and you can't sleep because your mind won't stop racing. You're watching the dailies. Then maybe you get 4 hours of sleep and you wake up and snow has fallen. So now, we've got the 15 pass parked outside. So before I can even get to set, I have to shovel the 15 pass free. And, that's starting at like 5:30 in the morning, and you're just out there shoveling and you're just thinking, what am I doing? What am I doing?
What am I doing?
Yeah. and then, but you don't want it to ever stop because it's the most fun.
That's debatable. I definitely,
you want sleep, but you don't want it to.
I was also, I had a lot of tasks on set in addition to starring in the film and also having written it. I was the only person on set thinking about costume continuity. So every night I would call the actors figuring out where the costumes were they would need the following day and would they have them. That whole process was really crazy. And then I also scheduled the film, which was by far the hardest part. And so there were things like we had a blizzard happen while we were supposed to shoot a lot of exteriors in Prospect Park. And so I had to spend 4 hours entering the fugue state of trying to redo the schedule, which is the worst kind of logic puzzle because so many things have to be, there's a SAG teenager and then there's a guy who needs to be flown back to San Francisco. And then there's one location that we cannot shoot there on Mondays and I have to shoot there on a Monday. It's all of this stuff that was just, and then one of our locations burned down while we were still filming. We had just finished shooting there. It was crazy the number of things that happened. And you have this general idea of if you're just really well organized and sort of smart, you'll figure it out. But it's just I think often about how much luck was required to carry us through, how many near disasters we had or disasters we had that we were able to figure out. And I just feel so, so lucky. But next time, for the next one, I definitely would like to pad it with more than 18 days because that was definitely one thing that made it a lot harder than I think it needed to be.
Yeah. I mean, filming in New York City is amazing because, on the one hand, it gives a lot in the sense that, you just roll outside, you turn on the camera, and there's a vibe. There's sort of this production value. It looks amazing. On the other hand, you can't control anything at all. You know that going into it. But that has, ripple effects on down from, at its most basic level for me. You're trying to concentrate on what you're doing. You're understaffed. You got incredibly expensive lenses and camera gear, maybe out on the street, and you're at least for me, you know, if one of those cases walks away, it's like the worst nightmare. Your production is basically over. Like that one case costs more than the entire budget of the film. So you're filming, and then you're constantly like looking over your shoulder to make sure that all the cases are there. You're doing your case counts. Okay, we got like 18 pieces. All right, it's like move on to the next location. So it's something as simple as that to, you know, we had actors in NYPD uniforms, and, you know, we had a couple instances like, you know, 9 a.m, you know, and somebody walks by and just starts yelling at our guys.
Yeah, like awful stuff.
I hate cops. Cops are the worst.
Yeah.
You know, 10 minutes of just, you know, our actors getting yelled at. I mean, clearly we're a film crew here, man. Like, we're just trying to make an art movie. Like, we're not in one.
Yeah, and we were shooting outside at that point, so we had to have actual, like, movie unit police officers present because we had, you know, people in cop uniforms. And so those guys were just sitting in their car, and you have this gross guy going by, like, yelling, effing pigs or whatever, and, like, the movie unit cops are just like, whatever.
I've seen worse. Yeah, gave me some respect for what they had to deal with, I guess, on a day-to-day basis. But it's, you know, so there are these things that you just, obviously you can't control, and but it makes things exciting, for sure.
Nobody good enough that you would ask them to sign a release, though.
Yeah, well let's see. I'm trying to think. Not really. I mean, we certainly, there's the guy that punched you.
I got punched by a homeless guy while we were filming at one point. And that was like one of those things too where I was like, at least he didn't punch me in the face. Like, this could be a lot worse. Like, he got me in the shoulder.
Yeah.
Nothing obviously broken.
He could have had his own show, I think, but like, you know, he was just like yelling stuff in the camera.
Yeah. I am a destroyer.
Yeah. But that didn't quite fit into our narrative. So he didn't make the cut.
And then that whole scene ended up not getting in the film, which was just heartbreaking because it was so annoying to shoot that and to get hit. And then I didn't even use it. Anyway.
But it made a good story.
Yeah.
There you go.
It's been survived. That's something.
Yeah. So, New York gave the film a lot of its character. What about New York giving to you in terms of your career and your lives? Why are you guys here in New York, and what's it doing for you?
I'll start. I love New York. I'm from a town of 2,000 people in Maryland, and I moved here for college, and I never left. So I've been here for 14 years, 15 years. Yeah, I moved here in 2000. And I see a lot of theater. I love the city so much. And at this point, you know, our social circle, we have a lot of great friends and a lot of great artist friends who I'm really inspired by, who are making it work. A lot of musician friends that I'm really impressed with their tenacity, and because it is a very unforgiving city. It can be very, of course, expensive, and the weather is for the most part terrible. Right now it's not so bad, but it's generally pretty bad. And so, you know, there are these things that are difficult about it, but there's just so much going on. And as a freelancer, I do a lot of voiceover. I do a lot of ads on Pandora, and I do a fair amount of video editing, but I'm phasing that out a little bit. I'm doing a lot less of that and more voiceover. And there are just a lot of opportunities that I'm happy. I happen to know the people at this point. You know, I've been freelance for 8 or 9 years. So I just have connections that would be difficult to start over if we were, you know, to move someplace else. And I don't know where I'd want to go. I mean, I am so devoted to this ridiculous, expensive, filthy city that has completely captured my heart. What about you, Alexi?
Well, we were talking a little bit about this earlier, but I do think, you know, things have changed quite a bit in the past decade. When I went to University of Georgia and loved Athens, moved to Atlanta for 1 year. It was my first year out of college, and you know, got a job editing, learned how to edit, and I had a sort of my very first art film project going on. Ended up moving back in with my parents and taking over their garage just to finish that up. And at that point, and they weren't living in Atlanta at the time, but they were out in Augusta. I just sort of felt like I don't know, you know, New York City always terrified me. That wasn't necessarily the first, you know, destination in my mind. I don't think you know, certainly visiting growing up, I just felt like, man, that's a place I will never ever live. But finishing editing my first little film that took me 5 years to do, you know, I didn't really want to go back to Athens, even though I love it very dearly. Didn't really want to go back to Atlanta because at that time, Turner was sort of the only game in town. You know, I mean, and I went in for an interview with them. I think it was like in broadcast ops or something. And it was me in this sort of corporate, I don't know, executive little conference room. Mm-hmm. And there's like 6 people interviewing me for this job where my job would basically have been to, watch the feed going out overnight, like, watching cartoons, which is cool, but I just didn't see where that would take me. And I just, the reason I got into making films was to be an independent filmmaker, to make more, hopefully art films and documentaries and things that were created autonomously and from sort of an outsider's perspective. And it sort of became pretty clear that, I mean, Turner's great, they make some amazing stuff, but if that was sort of the only option, it felt like, I don't know, maybe I need to push myself a little further, at least to experience something different. And so LA didn't seem right. I didn't really want to have to drive everywhere. It seemed sort of like not the right fit. And New York was the city where all the films not all the films, but many of my favorite films had come out of. There's sort of a certain sensibility, a certain grittiness, a certain challenge to it that I think scared me the most. And my best friend from growing up had moved up to New York, and he's like, well, just, come up for a visit and, like, see what you think. And I really was in a place where I just didn't know what the next move was, and I wrote my aunt a letter, and she had grown up in New York City. She was a hairdresser, and she'd done Broadway stuff and a few films, and I just wrote her for some advice. I was like, I don't know if I should go to film school. I don't know if I should stay down here. I don't know if I should, check out New York. She said, well, come up for a visit. And she put me in touch with someone that she met very early on, who was a PA initially when she met her, and who now is working for Albert Maysles. And so I got in touch with them, and I said, hey, I'll work for free, would love to, come up and sort of experience it for a week. I think I came up for maybe a week and a half.
And you came in September.
And I came in September, which is the best time of year. New York is like, the weather's beautiful. Yeah. And Albert at the time was doing a documentary on the Dalai Lama speaking in Central Park. So here I am all of a sudden. I'm in New York. The weather's absolutely magical. The Dalai Lama is there. I'm talking to Albert Maysles. We're sitting in Central Park, eating sandwiches. And I'm like, Albert, I don't know. I made this movie. I don't know what I should do. Should I just keep making movies, or should I go to film school, or should I stay in Georgia? He said, don't go to film school. Just keep making movies. You'll be fine. And at that point, I don't know. It was just like hearing from this amazing filmmaker, like, yeah, you can do it. Just keep doing it. And to him, it wasn't so much like, yeah, you need to be in New York. It was just like, wherever you are, just keep making movies. And that kind of gave me the confidence, and I just sort of got wrapped up in this idea of like, okay, this place is terrifying. Let me see if I can do it. So I, sold the car, packed up the stuff, little suitcase, came up to the city. And so I think for me it was about the challenge of it. A decade flies by really fast. And now, and the city's changed quite a bit in that 10 years, Brooklyn's changed immensely. It's in some way, it was always expensive, but it's gotten more expensive. On the other hand, there's a lot of opportunity here. So you kind of have to constantly, check in with yourself, and you say, like, why am I here? My family's still down in Georgia. I love it down there. In the meantime, I look back, and the Georgia film industry is amazing. It's just absolutely exploded. And I interned at the Georgia Film Commission back in the day before they were getting those incentives passed. And so to see that get passed, and to see the massive economic impact that's had, and all the jobs and all the creativity, it's just so beautiful. So at least for now, we're kind of, hunkered down here in Brooklyn for the moment. But this project that I'm working on with my brother called Culture Sport, which is an animation series, he was in Brooklyn, and we decided, New York's not the place for that production. Like, we need time, we need space. There's a certain amazing creative freedom that I think is afforded in Georgia. And so he moved back about a year and a half ago. And so we're basing that entire production out of Georgia. So I think increasingly Georgia is on my radar in terms of running productions through there. Maybe moving back someday. But it's, long story short, it's like night and day difference. From a decade ago when Turner was sort of the only game in town to now, I think you can really have a viable career in production as a filmmaker, doing television, commercials, etc. In Atlanta. It's really, really exciting.
This episode of the Film Festival Secrets podcast is sponsored in part by the Taos Shorts Film Festival, taking place next year, April 7th through 10th in Taos, New Mexico. Wikipedia tells me that Taos is the site of both a historic art colony and a Native American pueblo. But when I talked to founder and director Anna Cosentine, she pointed out that the geography of the place is just the first part of the journey.
People fly into Albuquerque, is our nearest airport, and they think they're there, but it's a 3-hour drive from Albuquerque, and there's really no public transportation. So the journey to get up to Taos is kind of an adventure in itself. But once they are up here, our venue is centered in town, which is a small town, and all the eateries and all the workshops, panels, and parties are really located, and hotels are located centrally, so everybody can walk to everything. People kind of become like a group, it's really. You don't have to text people, where are you going? What are you doing? Everybody kind of goes as a group and meet people. And I guess one of the main things we've heard is they've made such good connections and such good friends. And the audience, afterwards actually comes up to a lot of filmmakers and congratulates them and asks them and pick their brains. So it's a really hands-on, intimate festival.
The Taos Shorts Film Festival has deadlines coming up November 22nd, which is their regular deadline, and December 11th, which is their late deadline. So go to Taos Shorts, that's TaosShortz.com, or look for them on Film Freeway. And speaking of that Z on the end of shorts, I asked Anna what that was all about.
Well, just for you asking. I mean, why not? We really fancy ourselves as a cutting edge festival, and I think the Z kind of looks like a sword, like Zorro, And so the reason is to get people's attention. I mean, why not? What other film festival do you know? Shorts Film Festival uses a Z.
Thanks so much to Taos Shorts and Anna for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Well, Lana, aside though, it's not like you're working on Wall Street to support your independent film habit, right? You are finding work as a filmmaker here in the city.
Yes, but the irony is this. 95% of all my work in the last 4 years has involved me getting on a plane and going somewhere else.
Off in Georgia.
So I don't know if the universe is telling me something, but it's so rare that I actually have a shoot in New York. I have a handful of clients where it does happen, but for the most part, it's been a lot of docuseries work, television work, or short form, for the web, documentary work. And it's always like, hey, what are you doing? Can you be in Detroit on Thursday, or can you go to Ghana next week? Which is cool.
Right.
But it's like, I don't know. I'm probably on the road 250 days a year. And that's a hard pace to maintain. So when I come back to New York now, I just kind of feel like a tourist. I'm like, oh wow, this is a cool city.
Well, I'm sort of asking for, the kid who might be in Atlanta or Oklahoma or Minnesota or wherever, and they're sort of facing the same choice that you were facing. Do I stay here and make movies, or do I go somewhere place like LA or New York or now Atlanta maybe? There's something undeniable about the fact that location provides you with opportunities.
Yeah.
Do you think that, someone came to you and said, Mr. Maisels? No. But someone came to you and said, what do I do now? Right? Is New York the place for them?
Ooh, it's rough out there, and I think there's been such a sea change. I think if I were to do it over again at this point, I'd probably stay in Atlanta. If I were from Georgia, and if that's where my network was, I think ultimately it's a question of collaborators, right? Like it's a team sport. You can't do it on your own. Why would you want to do it on your own? So if you're in a small town in the middle of nowhere, but you've got a great network of collaborators, I think, you have access to to the equipment. It's much more affordable now. You have access to distribution. So if you have access to, collaborators, then you're in a pretty good position, especially considering the fact that nobody knows what's going on, including Hollywood, including the networks. I mean, 5 years from now, it's going to look entirely different. The unbundling of cable is going to have massive ramifications. Who knows what's next? I mean, so I think, if it were 10, 15, 20 years ago, I'd say you really should, at least for a few years, spend some time in New York or spend some time in LA. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. If you're good on the sort of internet networking marketing side, I think you can perhaps establish a following and maybe even some potential collaborators that aren't from your exact town. That's much more possible and doable than it is now. But that being said, there's a very real value, I think, to being in the place where it's kind of all happening, and I think you can certainly include Atlanta on that list now. LA, New York, Atlanta, Louisiana to a certain extent. There are active production communities if it's enough to, if there's enough work in whatever your city or region is, like, you can make a go of it. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't hurt, I think, to at least maybe experiment. If it pulls you, or if there's a fascination or curiosity, even if you're just getting started out, you've got nothing to lose. Like, spend a year in New York or LA or some place that is intriguing to you. And if it doesn't stick, then go back. But anyway, I'll just say, do what you want to do.
I would just like to throw in one thing, which is just really to raise awareness about it. But there's a wonderful program, a PA training program that the mayor's office does in New York, which is free. And we got a lot of PAs on our film from that program, and they were amazing. And you're trained in how to be on a set, and then those PAs are sent off to higher profile projects than indie films, but also indie films. And it's a great opportunity to learn. I mean, I started as a PA and I kind of worked my way up. I didn't go to film school. And I was doing the coordinating track for a while, and then I kind of switched over to editing, which was a helpful way to see, how to do budgets, and then also how to put scenes together, which really informed writing. And so it all kind of came together in a nice way for me. But I definitely feel like having the experience of working on sets in different roles is so important. And if you're a good PA, which is to say, can I curse? No. Which is to say, if you're not an asshole.
Oh, there it is.
You won't stay a PA for long. You know what I mean? So I definitely feel like that's such a great opportunity for someone who maybe can't afford film school or doesn't want to go, which I completely understand, and I don't think the film school is necessary. The PA training program is a great way to break in.
Yeah.
And then, PAs are paid, it's still $200 a day, right? It's not a bad way to make a living, especially if you're young and you're,
right. And I think that gets back to the question of place and city. And I think ultimately the driver of all paying work, which so far has not been the independent art films, but I'm hoping that'll change soon. But all the paying commercial or television work, it's all driven by relationships. Yeah. And if anything, I'd say that's maybe the great value is, not thinking of it so much as what city, but it's more what network of people. So if you can find that network of people and build those relationships online, then great. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is, whenever I come up for a job, if the production company or the network asks to see my resume, I'm pretty much 99% sure I'm not going to get that job. It's always, hey, so-and-so said you're great. Are you available? It's always and I think, especially in today's world, everything is driven by human relationships. I think it's always been the case, but I think now more so than ever. So if there's enough of a network and enough of a community, then stick with that. It's all about the people, I think, more so than just the shell of whatever city X, Y, or Z.
Yeah. I also, Neil Gaiman gave this great commencement speech a few years ago that I really love, which is, he was talking to an arts school, and he was talking about how to be a freelancer. And he was like, there are 3 things you need to be a good freelancer. You need to do really good work. You need to always do your work on time, and you need to be a pleasure to deal with. But you really only need 2, which I think is such good advice.
Yeah.
I love him.
We'll do the Neil Gaiman love-in just a minute. There's a quote I use all the time from a friend of mine, a guy named PJ Raval. He's a cinematographer and director and documentarian out of Austin. And we were at the Independent Film Festival of Boston at a party, and I forget how we got to this part in the conversation, but he said, you can be an asshole and work in this business, but it's going to cost you 3 times as much to make everything.
Yeah.
And it was a very telling statement of how willing people are to do, discounted or free work. Absolutely. A, if they like you, and B, if they feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. That it's not just a soulless, corporate whatever, a commercial for Pandora or whatever. I'm going to listen to Pandora a totally different way from now on. Is that her? No.
Yeah.
So, and Neil Gaiman, this is a total also side trip that I may edit out, who knows. But I was at the Strand bookstore this afternoon and just thumbing through. I was in the kids section because that's where my kids are, and I have no use for physical books anymore. It's just like, why have them in my house? But I picked up a book called The 13 Clocks by James Thurber, which I'd never heard of before. I love Thurber's stuff, but 13 Clocks, what is this? And I opened it, and the introduction was by Neil Gaiman. And I'm like, oh, and basically Gaiman tells the story of how he was on the phone with, he introduces it by saying that the book is a rare treasure, like it's this piece of magic. And I'm like, huh? And it says he was on the phone with a friend who was having a miserable day, had just broken up with her boyfriend, having job troubles, and in the middle of the phone conversation, he just starts reading her the book. And 20 minutes later, she's laughing and happy, and he'd done and said exactly the right thing. Wow. It's like, wow, okay. So now I have a copy of that book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Neil Gaiman is a pretty special writer and person.
So is Amanda Palmer, his wife.
Yeah.
Did you hear, she gave a podcast interview with Tim Ferriss, and I've been emailing it to everybody. It's amazing. She talks about creativity and how to be an artist and how to be a human, and it's so inspiring. She did a TED Talk, which I think was very similar. Yeah, she talks about, I haven't actually watched it, which is ridiculous, because she wrote the book. She wrote a book from that TED Talk. She basically got a ton of book deals, and she took one, and that now she's supporting that book and just doing a podcast for that. But anyway, so inspiring. Books and podcasts and support from fans. Yeah, it's a real thing. Yeah. Well, we'll see. Yeah. Well, while we're talking about support from fans, you guys raised some of your money through Seed and Spark. We did, yeah. And which is one of the lesser known, I think unfairly, but that's the way things are, lesser known crowdfunding platforms. It's so new though, too. We were one of the first projects. They were still in beta. Yeah. Is crowdfunding something you would turn to again? And talk about that experience a little bit. Yeah, I think crowdfunding is absolutely the way ahead for independent filmmakers on anything. Well, I don't know. I mean, it's ridiculous to put caps on it. Every project is different. I would say the money is very helpful, but I don't think that should be the primary reason to crowdfund. I think audience sort of building an engagement is really the best thing that you can get out of it. The money really helps, of course. But I think that if you think of that as sort of a byproduct, and you focus on engaging an audience and starting to build that audience, I think that's where the real value is. And this is something that, for us, even though we did crowdfund, we didn't have that mindset, at that point. It was like, okay, how can we, we've only got X number of, pennies that we've saved and so much on our credit cards. We did need that extra, I think, maybe third of the budget. So that was a bit more top of mind, but I think looking back, it's sort of like, oh wow, that, starting to build that audience from day one. And I think for any future projects, once you start that process, keeping in touch with them, sharing what the process is like. Cause, a zillion filmmakers have said this, and a lot of times it's true. It's like, oh man, the really great story would have been the making of this movie, right? Because there's always crazy stuff going on, and I think there are stories there, and I think if you can share those in a compelling way, perhaps you can grow your audience and just let people know how thankful you are for their support. Yeah. And then the point at which you do have a finished film for them to see,
it's maybe even a more valuable experience for them.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think sort of crowdfunding, absolutely. Seed and Spark, amazing. I think they have the correct model for independent filmmakers, but I think moving ahead, that really is a big piece of the puzzle for independent filmmakers.
So how is that factoring into the release of the film this fall?
So on the distribution front, the great thing about Seed and Spark is not only on the sort of the crowdfunding side on the front end for raising part of your budget and building your audience, they've also now built in a really amazing back-end distribution deal. So they've cut some deals with Verizon Fios for VOD release. They've got a digital aggregator partnership that can get your film plugged into, the usual suspects, iTunes, Hulu, blah, blah, blah. Netflix is not a guaranteed thing, but it's certainly submitted, and if Netflix chooses to license the film, that's a possibility as well. But these are things that up until this point, even when we were making the film, there wasn't necessarily a ready pathway for that. So that's pretty huge for us. So we'll be releasing through Seed and Spark and then into these other platforms this fall, and so we're very grateful for that opportunity.
So you ended up at how many festivals?
We've played 8.
8. That's a pretty good number for
Yeah.
a feature, honestly. Apart from maybe being a little more strategic about your submitting next time, the things you'll do differently on your next project?
For film festival submissions specifically?
We'll read the updated version of your book first.
Well,
I appreciate that. but-
Totally.
Yeah, this is part of the research for that book, so.
Well, let's see. All right, so we've got one coming up that we'll be filming in spring, which Bodine is going to direct,
another screenplay.
which we're very excited about.
Yeah.
And so, let's think through. We haven't gotten into the nitty-gritty of it quite yet, but I think we could probably sort of map out a general strategy.
Yeah.
What would you like to have happen?
I mean, I would definitely want to have the film much more complete before submitting to some of the higher tier festivals, especially. I think a lot of people submit rough cuts to Sundance, and that's kind of their deadline for getting a rough cut together. I feel like I know a lot of people who've said that, and I definitely felt like that was true of us. That's probably not the best idea. You only get one shot at being seen by these people. You want to make sure it's the best possible film. I definitely, all of the festivals that we played were so incredible that I want to continue going back to them. Indie Memphis was an incredible experience.
Oh, yeah.
Woods Hole was really, really fun. Atlanta Film Festival was a great time. Brooklyn Film Festival has my heart forever. We've really been lucky with the response we've gotten at the festivals too. We've won awards at 4 of the 8, which was also really gratifying.
Did you test the film before you sent it anywhere?
With friends, sending links to friends and getting feedback on edits from people. I especially like sending the drafts of the script to so many people, which I'm doing now in this other screenplay, my poor friends. But having to read someone's work in progress screenplay must be got a special place in heaven for them. Same thing with watching unfinished cuts of a film. Good grief. But I got a lot of feedback from people, and you definitely reach a point where you kind of get the sense there are certain people who are seeing it who understand what you're going for and get the aesthetic and like the aesthetic. And then you get people who are watching it who are like, I kind of wish this was more like a film that I like watching. You know what I mean? And those notes are less useful. And it's definitely a point where I realized I could sort of separate those two and not, get hurt by whatever, someone not getting my vision or, that whole thing. So I feel like getting feedback from people whose temperament and taste was in line with the kind of product I was trying to make, was really helpful. And I did get a lot of feedback, and we ended up changing the ending really drastically based on feedback. The ending is that it had been written and shot, wasn't reading. It was not reading in ways that I was not okay with. People were misunderstanding in ways that completely changed the film. And so we changed it to something else that Alexi made me shoot against my will. I'm so grateful. That was a big change that happened from showing the film to people.
Yeah, I think, thinking through sort of, and here's the exciting part, right, is that, for us, it's not, okay, we're just going to make this one film and, whether it makes money or loses money, that's it. We're really trying to take the long view and think about building a catalog over time and building a career over a long period of time. So this first film, Movement and Location, however it does financially, I think we made it for lean enough that it won't totally destroy us, and hopefully it's actually something that we can make that money back and roll it into this next project. But beyond just, for once, hopefully the money moving in the right direction, the thing that I'm most excited about is having some real data. And then being able to share that data with other filmmakers to say, this was our budget, this is what it cost, and now this is where the revenue streams came in. And I think this is whether it's, as an independent filmmaker, sort of balancing commerce and art or just purely on a project by project basis. I think that the pathway ahead, the sustainable pathway ahead is multiple revenue streams. It's sort of this long tail economic theory. You gotta just have maybe a little bit of money coming from a bunch of different platforms, and that in its entirety should be enough. But if you're taking the long view, okay, here's film number 1. We've got another one lined up next year. We've got an audience that we can kind of hopefully build off of, some festival relationships that we can kind of hopefully build off of, and just a lot more know-how that we can build off of. But I would say in terms of tactically, what would be the biggest difference for us moving ahead? The mechanics of production are generally always the same. It's always grueling, and you never have enough time, and you never have enough resources. You just make it work, right? But how can we sort of be a bit more nimble, be a bit more forward thinking on the marketing side and the audience side? Which, again, like I said earlier, and I really do believe it is the biggest challenge for independent filmmakers of our generation is in a sea of endless content. How do you even just let people know that you're there? And I think there's a lot of possibilities there, in terms of big data, in terms of AI, in terms of things that will be coming ahead in the years ahead that might help us as independent filmmakers if we leverage those technologies to figure out, this is where our audience is. Right. Hey, we're here, but thinking through that tactically, I think having a producer of marketing and distribution and sort of social media outreach from day one, and who's on set every day and who's going to take it all the way through, that would be the big difference, because I think it will help on the festival side. I think it will help on the audience building side, and ultimately it will help on the marketing and distribution side. And then that just is something that was never on my radar before. But I think it's absolutely essential, because there's nothing worse than spending all this time, all these resources on a film that then is released into a vacuum. You can't have that. So I think that moving ahead would be just being a bit smarter about ongoing outreach.
Yeah, it's a great point.
When you get that figured out, let us know.
Me and AI and the big data stuff. Yeah, we'll get it all figured out.
We've been doing some work for IBM recently, so big data stuff.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Yeah. I think it's
watching a lot of
we think about how much has changed in the last 10 years. I think the next 10 years are going to be even crazier.
Yeah.
Alexis and Bodine, thank you so much.
Oh my gosh,
for
my
spending
pleasure.
this time with us.
Thank you, Chris.
You're great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
If you made it all the way through those bumps and thumps and are still listening, I thank you with great humility. I'm learning a lot about podcasting, especially recording on location, and I promise you will never hear anything quite like that again. But I do want to thank the Tal Shorts Film Festival, Film Freeway, and Seed and Spark for supporting the podcast. Don't forget to visit filmfestivalsecrets.com and find me on Twitter at FFSecrets. Finally, if you'd like to see Movement and Location, you can see it playing through September 24th at the Cinema Village in New York City, playing October 2nd through 8th at the Arena Cinema Hollywood in Los Angeles, and throughout the South in October and December. Visit movementandlocation.com to learn more all about that. Thanks again, Alexis and Bodine, and I'll see you next episode.